This is Lisa from Mobile Tech Review, and today we're going to do a smackdown between two 10.1-inch current Android tablets. We have the Nexus 10 over here, Google's flagship and only 10-inch tablet, and here we have the Asus MeMO Pad 10, Asus's most affordable 10-inch Android tablet. $100 price difference. We're going to see what you get and what you don't get. So here we have the Nexus 10, that's the Google Nexus 10, pure Android device marketed directly by Google, made by Samsung, and here we have the Asus MeMO Pad 10, Asus's latest Android tablet, meant to be affordable. Now, even the Nexus 10 isn't the most expensive guy on the block, but it's not super cheap either. For the 16 gig storage model, you're looking at $399. But Asus, they come in for even less money, 16 gig, and you can only get this with 16 gigs. It's $299. That's really wildly affordable for a 10.1-inch Android tablet from a name brand manufacturer with pretty good specs. So which should you pick? Well, first off, if money is your most important concern, obviously the Asus has a big advantage here. $100 might not sound like much, but as a percentage of the total device cost, it's actually quite significant. Well, for those of you who have a little bit more wiggle room for spending money and you're considering your options, maybe you're worried about future-proofing for your device, the Nexus 10 is certainly worth a look, and it's still less expensive than some competitors on the market like the Samsung Galaxy Note 10.1. Of course, the Note 10.1 brings in something pretty nifty, the Wacom digital pen, but some people have a use for that, some people don't. For those of you who do want more internal storage, by the way, the Nexus 10 is also available with 32 gigs of storage. That's going to cost you $499, so you're paying a lot of money for that extra 16 gigs of internal storage. But then again, here's a comparison point that's important. They've kind of got you over a barrel with the Nexus 10 because it doesn't have a micro SD card slot. So if you want to expand storage, you can't say, I'm just going to pop in a card and put all my movies on there and all my music. Nope, can't do it. Also, when it comes to USB hosts, that is using USB peripherals, particularly things like flash drives or external hard drives, the Nexus 10 does not have USB host for mass storage built-in support. The Asus does. You can plug in a flash drive. You need to get a USB host dongle adapter. Those things are pretty cheap and easy to find these days. So you can actually use your hard drives and flash drives, but you can do it. Now with the Nexus 10, if you want to root it and install Stick Mounter, which is free, you can go ahead and do that. And I know a lot of people get the Nexus devices do like to do things like root or install custom ROMs. But I found that Stick Mounter isn't working under Android 4.2.2, the latest operating system available for the Nexus 10. So I got Nexus Media Importer instead, which is $299 on the Google Play Store, and it does a good job of that. So you don't have to root if you get Nexus Media Importer. So for $3, you do get that functionality back. You cannot write to external devices like flash drives or hard drives, which you can do on the Asus. Most significant difference, or perhaps one of the most significant differences between these two, is the display. Now, neither of these has anything less than a very nice display. But the Nexus 10 is pretty much, well, it's famous for outdoing even the Retina iPad for resolution. 2560 by 1600 pixels. That is incredible pixel density, and yes, it is extremely sharp display. It's also quite bright. It's a Samsung PLS display. That's a true RGB stripe. Gorgeous to look at. Color accuracy is about average on it, but then again, most Android tablets are at best moderately accurate, so we're not going to complain about that. Color saturation is pleasing, not quite as saturated as the iPad with Retina display, but very nice. Awesome display, especially if you're going to do something like read magazines, either using Zinio or the Google Play magazine reader, because there you get the magazine layout with the tiny text, and we'll show you the difference in a minute. And that's when you're really going to notice the difference between something that looks fuzzy and challenging and something that looks readable. The Asus, you get your everyday average 1280 by 800 display. It is an IPS display. It's a nice high contrast display with good colors, but obviously much lower resolution. And again, when you're looking at particularly a text, that's where you're going to notice the difference. You'll notice the sharpness on the Nexus 10 more. Now, holding the Asus at an average distance away from your face when you're reading a web page or something like that, yes, you can still notice the difference, but it's by no means an unappealing experience on the MeMO Pad. Now we've got the same magazine open in Google Play magazines on the same page, and if we zoom in, you're going to see that the small text here, the description of the articles, is still very sharp. Yes, it's small, but it's readable. You don't really feel like you have to pinch zoom just to read what's going on there, nor do you feel like your eyes are just slightly out of focus or suddenly 10 years older. Nice and sharp, really, really impressive. And as we look at the Asus MeMO Pad, you can see that the text is a little bit fainter, not for the bulleted headlines, but for the description underneath. Not as sharp, not quite as easy to read. Also, you'll notice the difference in the display brightness between the two. When we zoom back out again, the Nexus 10 has a brighter display. That said, I would not complain about the MeMo Pad 10. It's certainly more than adequately bright for indoor use. If you're going to take it outdoors, well, that's a little bit challenging, but honestly, with any of these, glare is going to be the biggest factor when you take these outside to read in sunlight. Now, when it comes to text sharpness on web pages and image sharpness, they both actually look quite good, to be honest. I'm not complaining about the Asus too much there. Yes, this is still going to be sharper, but this is plenty readable. So for those of you who don't read magazines, you don't read things with tiny text, perhaps you don't even read a whole lot of books, then the Asus is going to work for you. In fact, the Asus is okay for reading on books, but I would personally go for the sharper display if reading ebooks is a whole lot of what you do on a tablet. In terms of video quality, honestly, that's where you start to see less of a difference, especially if you're looking at the same 720p content on both devices. Nice thing about full 1080 content on the Nexus is, well, that fits nicely inside the display. There's no scaling down necessary. And now we've got the same image up here on screen, 1920 by 1200, and honestly, the amount of detail that you're going to see is the same on both. The difference is going to be in the brightness and the color saturation levels. A little bit more color saturation looks like on the Nexus 10. That's probably because the brightness is also higher on it, so you just, well, colors are going to pop if it's brighter. But in terms of detail, pretty much you're seeing the same thing here. Now, after display quality, the other important thing is going to be performance. First off, let me say NVIDIA Tegra 3 quad core in here, 1.2 gigahertz with multiple cores running. You can go as high as 1.4 gigahertz with one core running. This is GeForce Graphics. Nominally, that's a 12-core GPU. The Nexus 10, and this is an ARM 9 CPU, which is the older CPU that's used in pretty much every Android tablet. Nexus 10 is a dual core, not a quad core, but a high. It uses the new ARM A15, which is more efficient in terms of power and also a lot more powerful in terms of processing power, and it has a quad-core Mali T604 GPU in it, which does benchmark faster than the Tegra 3's GeForce. Now, when Tegra 4 comes out, it's going to be a whole other story and another can of worms, shall we say, but right here you're looking at more power in the Nexus 10. You've got to be getting something for your money, right? In terms of quadrant speeds, we got 3309 on the Asus MeMo Pad 10, versus 4959 on the Nexus 10. Onto to benchmark for the Nexus 10 was 13,658 versus 12,421. GL benchmark 2.5 for the Egypt off-screen classic test, 43 frames per second on-screen and 34 frames per second off-screen for the Asus MeMo Pad, and a very impressive 50 frames per second on-screen and 89 frames per second off-screen with the Nexus 10. So you're getting more performance, you're getting more speed. That said, the MeMo Pad really feels quite fast, and still that's pretty much the same CPU you're going to find in other higher-end Android tablets. It's not a slouch. For those of you who are just looking for something for normal everyday use, you don't have to have the best. You're not worried about future-proofing and having something that's going to last you as many years as possible. It's certainly adequate. But if you do have that need for speed, if you do want something that you know is going to hold up and look good a year from now when you're playing games and things like that, particularly games which are very graphically demanding and CPU intensive, the Nexus 10 is going to be the winner. Couple that with the difference in storage speeds, where the Asus is still slow. That's Asus's problem with their tablets, and we'll show you that, versus the Nexus 10 having pretty good internal transfer speeds. And yeah, you're looking at a faster package with the Nexus 10. One thing to say about that, though, there are a lot of Tegra Zone games out there that are optimized for the Tegra 3 CPU, and you're going to get extra special effects, the splashing of water on screen if it involves water, reflections on surfaces, extra banners on the wall in games like Shadowgun, and you're not going to get that if it's not a Tegra 3, because the game developers have optimized and added those extra special things in for the Tegra 3. So let's look around the devices. Both of these weigh around 1.3 pounds, and they're just about the same thickness, so you're not looking at anything too different there. They're both pretty easy to hold. The Asus, well, this is the MeMo Pad 10 budget model, so that means you're not going to get a fancy metal back like you do on the Transformer Prime. You get good old-fashioned plastic, which, as you can see, picks up some fingerprints. We have the midnight blue here. You can also get this in fuchsia pink for you wild and crazy folks out there, or white. Solid, unrelieved plastic, but actually a pretty clean looking back. I'm not going to complain about that, and it has moderate grip. It's not slippy like certain Samsung products. Controls are easy to use. The bevel on the side is not so severe anymore, so that your fingers are constantly slipping off. It feels nice to hold it. Pretty easy to use. A little bit of creak in the plastic if you try hard. Nothing really too terribly alarming. And if we take a look at our buddy, the Nexus 10 here, little rounded off corners. Really, that doesn't make so much of a difference when you're holding it, I don't think, but even more curvy softness here. The soft touch back is just like awesome to hold. It's really a weird surface. It's very rubbery. It feels like rubber. It's really hard to drop this. Let's put it that way. Very grippy. There it is. Odd looking. Also, some of them creak more than others. We do have one spot that gives a little creak on here, so for those of you who really like serious aluminum metal rigidity, neither of these is going to make you happy. Both of these have 5 megapixel cameras logically placed on the back. Nexus 10, you have an LED flash. You do not have an LED flash on the Asus. Stereo speakers are, well, just where they should be on this guy. They're on the front, just like some recent Samsung branded tablets. Right here, facing at you. Pretty good sound on this tablet. Obviously well aimed at you. Enough to fill a small room, as long as it's not too noisy. Now the Asus has what seems like less brilliant speaker placement. We have a speaker here, we have one on the opposing side. Good thing is they're kind of high up, because you tend to hold the tablet a little bit lower when you're holding it, so your hands are not going to block these. And Asus's software on this is really very effective. They have settings for gaming, for movies. The back will actually vibrate when you're using movie and gaming settings. So, you know, I would give it a tie. I might even give the Asus a little extra bonus there, because their EQ really works very well. And the volume is certainly just as loud, even though it's facing out backwards versus the Nexus 10. Up front on these guys, we have a 1.9 megapixel camera on the Nexus 10, a 1.2 megapixel camera on the Asus MeMO Pad 10. The front camera is pretty much the same as you get in the Galaxy Note 10.1 on the Nexus 10. Funny thing, Samsung makes them both. It's quite good quality. The quality of the MeMO Pad, it's okay, it's decent. It's good enough for Skype or some Google Talk video chat. Not quite as good. When it gets to the 5 megapixel cameras, well, obviously you're going to get the same resolution there. I do give the edge to the Nexus 10. Samsung really knows how to make a nice camera. Asus, with all of their tablets, they can get some real nice sharpness and clarity, but I always find they have trouble with light balance in bright outdoor settings. And there's no flash on the Asus. In terms of UI, with my scary larger-than-life hand as the subject matter right here, you can see absolute simplicity here on the Nexus side. If you like a whole lot of features, well, you can bring up various settings by tapping here. That's not the most intuitive thing, so I've just almost accidentally made a setting change I didn't want to. If you press and hold, you can control the flash. I know a little hard to see because I have to keep pressing and holding so I can get to this. White balance, more settings right here. Not too much going on. With the Asus, we have a whole bunch of settings. Pretty easy to locate right here. You don't have to play games with the little circle in the center. You can hide that if you want. You can bring that back up. So we have white balance, resolution, EV adjustment, resolution size, and even more settings right here. But still, in terms of image quality and having a flash on the Nexus 10, even if the UI is a little bit less fancy, I give it the edge. So how about storage speeds? That's kind of been the bane of Asus's existence when it comes to their Android tablets. They use slow internal storage. And though we haven't had any of the please wait messages that we were seeing on some older Transformer tablets, even the more higher end ones, on the MeMO Pad, I can still tell you just from looking at the Android storage benchmarks here, still internal storage is pretty darn slow. So as a comparison right here, we run Android Bench on both of these tablets, and you can see that sequential reads and writes here, where higher numbers are better, are considerably higher than they are on the Asus MeMO Pad. And as we look down, for things like browser benchmark, market speed, camera speed, that's where lower numbers are better. And in fact, we see that the Nexus 10 is doing considerably better. So for storage performance, yes, the Nexus 10 is definitely going to be the winner here. So for example, for something like sequential read right here, we can see we got 99 megabit per second on the Nexus 10 and only 30.5 on the Asus MeMO Pad. There you go, faster storage. For those of you who are Android enthusiasts or tinkerers, well, you're probably going to want that Nexus 10 right off the bat. Pure vanilla Android there, no embellishments, no enhancements, nothing to slow you down. Also, easy to unlock the bootloader, no manufacturer is standing in the way there, and you can put custom ROMs on there, you can root it, you can go to town. With Asus, a little bit more challenging to do the same things on there. Really, the Asus is aimed more at your average consumer who doesn't know root from bootloader, from any of those things. In terms of user interface, we're looking at Android 4.1 1 Jelly Bean over here, 4.2 Jelly Bean over here. Really nothing much changes with the user interface. A lot of similarities, but this looks a little bit more holdover to the honeycomb days, and it's not necessarily always such a bad thing. You can see right here we have our centered icons for navigation, back, home, and multitasking. They're in this corner over here. You can throw your icons and your widgets on the desktop either way you want. If you want to get all of your applications, you tap over here on this guy, you tap up in this corner over here. After you do that, you're looking at pretty much the same experience with the same separation of apps and widgets to get to. Asus includes some widgets for their own applications, and we'll discuss their apps in a minute. With this guy here, if you want to get to more settings, you swipe down, and there you can see I can get to settings, I can get to brightness. I have to tap on brightness, then I have to drag the slider. So a little bit of a two-step operation going on there. I can get my battery status, control my wireless radios. Asus, I like what they did here. A lot of manufacturers customize that. You got a lot more at your fingertips right here. You can turn your wireless radios on and off. You can set performance level for the CPU. You can control the brightness right here without having to make yet another tap. And you've got all your status messages there as well. A little bit more user-friendly probably for the newbies. When it comes to custom software, well, this is a Nexus device. You're going to get all the Google apps that are available. You're not going to get any other custom software. Anything you see here, like Netflix, Grand Theft Auto, well, I've downloaded those. Those were not on there. So you get the core Google apps, you get the YouTube, you get the Chrome web browser, Google Play Books, Google Play Movies, Google Play Magazines, Google Plus, all that stuff. Here we have several Asus custom added applications, and they're pretty useful. They have their app backup here, so you can actually back up your applications. You geeky people know what that means. You can not only make up backups of your applications, but you can put them on other devices if you're a little bit devious. We have App Locker to keep prying eyes out of certain applications. We have Asus Studio, their audio wizard on here, which contributes to the good sound on here. And they have an EPUB ebook reader on here as well, and their own multimedia player. And Supernote Lite, which is pretty cool. This is a note-taking app that you can draw on, you can write on. No digital pen with this. You could use a capacitive stylus if you want, but that's a nice add-on. Now, of course, there are things you can download to do the same thing on the Nexus 10, but this gets you started with those applications. So for those of you who are I'm more of a newbie and I want some apps to get me going in the right direction, you're going to get those with the Asus. With the Nexus, a little bit more of a clean slate. Both of these, of course, are going to have the basics like email, Gmail, your web browser. Speaking of the web browser, only Chrome on our Nexus 10 here. That's what Google wants to use going forward with newer versions of Android. Here, even though this does ship with Jelly Bean, we have the WebKit web browser and Chrome on board. Now, the WebKit web browser is kind of handy to have. That's the older Google browser that we know and love from previous versions of Android, because that will work with Adobe Flash. That's pretty awesome. You're still going to have to sideload Flash, download it, run it yourself and install, but for those of you who are addicted to your Flash, well, that's another way of doing it. Now, on my Nexus 10, I've downloaded Boat Browser, which also supports Adobe Flash. Now here we have a Tegra Zone optimized game. This is Dead Trigger, and you can see the difference. The Asus here on the right, even though it doesn't have the more powerful graphics card, is Tegra Zone optimized, has a Tegra 3. So you can see we have more effects, like we have water here on the ground. And on the Nexus 10, we got dry ground. It's a little disappointing, isn't it? They both play equally well and smoothly, honestly. Either one has more than enough power to play Dead Trigger just fine, and that goes for most 3D games. I have noticed a couple of games like Bard's Tale where the Nexus 10 is a little bit smoother. When you're walking around, controls just works a little bit more easily on that, but it's a fine point. Both of these use micro USB style charging, 5 volt 2 amp chargers, same thing you see on an iPad and some other mobile OS tablets. The battery inside the Nexus 10 is bigger than it needs to be, because that's a pretty power-hungry CPU and GPU in there. Both of them, for me, have been lasting about 8 hours on a charge. Now, I know some of you out there with the Nexus 10 have had some problems with your battery life, but I have not had any problems with defective battery or battery life whatsoever. In terms of charge times, because the battery here is bigger and they're both using pretty low power chargers, Nexus 10 takes a lot longer to charge. It can take like 5 hours to charge that if you've got it completely empty, whereas the Asus will charge in about 3. So that's the Asus MeMO Pad 10 and the Nexus 10. Both of them are available now, and I hope now you see what you're getting for that extra $100 in the Nexus and see if it's really worth it to you. For those of you who just want a pretty decent name brand Android tablet with good specs, the Asus really is pretty darn solid. But if you're looking for that extra something, that really awesome Super HD display and faster processing power, the Nexus is going to give it to you. I'm Lisa from Mobile Tech Review. Be sure to watch our video review of each of these tablets, read our written reviews, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and while you're at it, hit that like button too.